what's the latest here? What are you hearing as we near finality with Sasaki? And thanks for hopping on as always.
Yeah, my pleasure. First of all, I mean, I don't know. Like, it was just at the Corbin Burns press conference this afternoon here in Phoenix, and was talking to people about Sasaki too. And the truth of the matter is that nobody knows what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. The Padres sound very confident, from what I understand. I know Bob Nightingale tweeted that yesterday, and Bob and I were talking a little bit about it at the presser, just in that there's a confidence that the Padres have that he's going to be with them. But I believe the Dodgers have the same confidence as well. And I don't think, listen, you're not coming from Japan and flying all the way to Toronto to, throw at Rogers Center and tour the city without making it a serious consideration, So I wish I had a good answer for you or some real insight, but there just isn't any. And, we're just going to be waiting from today until, the 23rd. Mm-hmm. Sasaki could make his decision at any time, and my guess is it'll kind of come out of the blue in the same way that Ohtani's did. And if you remember when Ohtani signed with the Angels, that literally knocked Billy Epler, their GM, out of his chair. He was sitting in his chair, he got the phone call, and he tilted back and fell out of it. He was so surprised. So I have a feeling that metaphorically, probably as opposed to literally, whoever ends up, Sasaki ends up choosing, the executives will have the same feel.
Okay, so let's go to hypotheticals, because we love hypotheticals here. He lands with the Padres. How much better does this make the Padres in the now and the future, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think in the future it makes them, listen, it answers a lot of questions, right? Because it gives them a bona fide starter. I do think in the short term it makes them better than what they are now. They will have a better roster. But I think the other problem to keep in mind with it is that he didn't throw all that many innings last year because of injury. And, the Sasaki that I saw in the WBC wasn't a finished product. There's 2 years age difference between him and Yamamoto. And the polish was significantly different in that event from Yamamoto than it was from Sasaki. Now, granted, that's 2 years ago now. So, he has likely improved in that regard. But I am skeptical it's going to have a huge impact for all of this season. I think he will have impactful moments because his stuff is good enough that that'll be the case. But I would not be surprised that he's a lot like most other 23-year-old starters who have excelled in the minors, but who have not faced big league hitters consistently, that there are going to be some moments that aren't great. I don't think this is Paul Skeens coming in and dominating the league. I think he's a guy that will have dominant stuff and have dominant stretches, but I would not be surprised if that it's more, he follows more of the path of like a traditional player when they come to the big leagues, as opposed to just being an ascendant star from the moment that he toes the rubber.
Mike Ferrin, MLB Network Radio, back with us here. Jon and Jim, San Diego Sports 760. This has been well documented and written about here. This ownership dispute, lawsuit, infighting, whatever you want to call it. Do you think this is at all impactful when it comes to Roki or not?
I don't know. I mean, I think, I don't know that he has, that what his relationship is like with ownership in Japan. I don't know that he's trying to build relationships with the owners in the U.S. the same way. I mean, listen, like he could theoretically do that with the Dodgers owners, right? Because Mark Walter, who's the head of their ownership group, is pretty prominent and is around, right? Even though I think he lives full time in Chicago, or at least part of the time in Chicago. There's not really anybody to pal up to in Toronto because they're owned by Rogers Communication, which is one of the biggest communication companies in the world. Mm-hmm. So I'm skeptical. I don't think it helps, but I'm skeptical that it's going to have a huge impact on what his decision is. Like, the reason if he chooses the Dodgers or the Blue Jays, I don't think it's going to be because of the Padres ownership situation. I think it's, if it's the Dodgers, it's going to be because they have a long history now of developing young pitchers who are pretty good, albeit some with injury history. And if he chooses Toronto, it's because they have gotten more out of pitchers at the big league level than when those guys arrived. So I think it probably has a much more practical application on him being great than it does on him trying to cozy up to ownership. This isn't the Juan Soto Peter Seidler relationship that we're looking at.
Yeah, and as far as the lawsuit and the infighting between the Seidler brothers and the widow of Peter, how much do you think that could affect just future off seasons go as far as spending and potentially down the line this may turn into a selling of the team? Like how big of a deal do you in your opinion think this is?
Well, I think for the ownership it has the potential to be a pretty big deal. I think the odds are overwhelming. Just and listen, I've had some conversations with people around it. I don't want to make it sound like I have a ton of information because I don't, but it does sound like there is a good chance that people were told what they wanted to hear at some point, but that that most likely the scenario is that the Seidler brothers will have control of the team if this goes to court. And I'm not I would not think that this is going to go to court because the last thing that any company wants in a lawsuit like this is to have discovery and have, even if it's relatively minor dirty laundry, there's almost always an email that has something that can be inflammatory in it, even if it's not intended that way. So I would be shocked if that ended up happening. I do think a real potential outcome is a sale. And I think it's a question of, whether or not they get to that point or if there's something that can be negotiated that helps to get everybody onto the same page. I mean, Seidler was kind of frozen out by the brothers late in the season last year, and it's not entirely clear to me why that happened. But I'm also not sure that she, listen, she's an attorney, right? And so she has an idea of what legal recourse can bring. There are plenty of other attorneys that are working with the Seidler brothers as well. So I don't know where this goes. It doesn't look great. And generally infighting with owners ends up either with one person or one side taking full control and forcing the other out, or with a sale. I mean, the last time I really feel like we saw an infighting like this, where, with the exception of the Angelos lawsuit, which was, if you know the kind of what was going on with Baltimore ownership, was more just a way for Lou Angelos to make sure that he had control of the law firm, it seemed like. But you have to go back to like the Wilpons and Doubledays with the Mets. And when Nelson Doubleday's family was kind of forced out of that ownership and the Wilpons took control, there wasn't a lawsuit, but it was kind of a takeover. So I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen. I am very curious to see where it goes. But there are a lot of different paths that I think lead to, potential change in who the point person is for the Padres at the very least, if not a full out sale. And again, this is reading tea leaves. I don't have any real inside information. It's just kind of watching the history of these events.
Yeah, something to certainly keep an eye on for Padres fans moving forward. Mike Ferrin, MLB Network Radio, with us right now on Jon and Jim. Switching gears from Roki to other needs for the Padres. Yeah. I mean, Jurickson Profar has played his best baseball here. We know he's a free agent. We know the Padres are maybe up against it already with the CBT. What's the market look like for Jurickson? What do you think is most likely?
Great question. It doesn't seem like there's any market for
right.
anybody right now, right? Yeah. Like the number of free agents that are out there. It's like I feel the Padres keep getting lumped into this group of teams that haven't spent this winter, right? And like there's 5 teams that haven't spent a single dollar. Well, there's like 7 billion free agents still. Right. So like it's not a surprise that some of these teams haven't spent. I think Profar is obviously a very good fit. I would, if I am the Padres, I would be trying to negotiate from a standpoint of, hey, it's great that you performed well in a Padres uniform, but you haven't exactly had consistent performance from year to year. And I would be trying to use that. I don't know exactly how much money they have. I did read in the San Diego Union Tribune that the payroll was expected to go up from last year, but a lot of that could be taken up by internal raises, right? So, listen, they need an outfielder. They were in the same position in spring training last year where they needed 2, and they got Profar for 1 year, $1 million. So and got an incredible season out of him. Now, I don't know that they're going to necessarily get somebody for $1 million, but there are other players out there that are potentially good fits. I'm a big Austin Hayes fan. I know it did not go well for him in Philly last year, but that was because he was dealing with a kidney ailment, which sounds like it is healed. He also basically his entire struggle in Baltimore uniform was with that giant left field that they had and against right-handed pitching at home. That was really all that he struggled. He's a pretty good player. He's still out there. Harrison Bader is a very good defender. You could even see him go back down a road of like David Peralta and create a platoon out there. I mean, I think left field, shortstop, and probably the rotation are three spots that they could still look at. And at the very least, an outfielder and somebody who can join the rotation makes sense. And that's why Sasaki is so important for them, because it is definitely the cheapest way to add a quality arm, because he would be making the league minimum this year, and that would be pretty remarkable to have that kind of talent, and to have him as part of this rotation going forward with both Cease and King heading to free agency.
And final one from me, before the lawsuit and Roki week, the big topic around here was like the Dylan Cease, I guess, uncertainty and the possibility of them trading Dylan Cease. If that were to happen, what do you think he could get in return?
I mean, I think it depends on where he would end up going. There were a lot of rumors about them talking to Baltimore, but Baltimore seems to have a fairly full rotation at this point. I mean, I think it'll only make sense if you can fill multiple holes for multiple years, right? Yeah. So, a Cease trade would be similar to what Corbin Burns was last year, which was Milwaukee did pretty well in that trade. They ended up with an everyday left side of the infielder and a left-hander to dream on, plus a draft pick, right? And so that was pretty good. And DL Hall has had some injury issues, but he's a premium left-hander, and I wouldn't be surprised if he and Trevor McGill are finishing games for the Brewers this year. And Ortiz, a little bit passive as a hitter, but a very good defender. He'll probably play shortstop for them. So Cease isn't quite what Burns was a year ago, but he's still pretty good. So something similar to that probably makes sense. You get a position player and a pitcher who might be a starter or might be a reliever, would make sense. Or two arms and maybe, somebody lower level, or a draft pick, which certainly they would love to be able to have more draft capital. I think this is an AJ Preller kind of draft because there's a ton of really good prep bats. So I think those are potential outcomes if they were to go down that road. I also wonder if they would consider it with Michael King as opposed to Cease, because King is a free agent after this year too. Mm-hmm. And, I think they're probably, listen, King was amazing last year, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a huge ramp up in innings. And, I'd be worried about that a little bit if I were a Warrior. And so, and those front offices are. So I think they have a couple of potential arms that they could move, but it doesn't mean that they're going to. And I don't necessarily think that they have to. I mean, if you add Sasaki to the mix, all of a sudden you're looking at him as their fourth starter, right?
Yeah.
He's King, Darvish, Sasaki, and then Matt Waldron, or good. Randy Vasquez or Johnny Brito. There's a lot of options for them there. And they've talked about stretching out Morejon, right? So it's pretty good. And maybe they can do some of that and trade, one of those starters to be able to fill a couple other holes. But I mean, at this point, I think everything is pretty much on hold until they figure out exactly, where Sasaki is going to play.
Mike, you're the best. Awesome insight for Padres fans. Everyone is just clamoring for information and news.
Refresh.
I can't do anything this weekend. It's a long weekend. If he doesn't, I just got to stay by my phone. Yeah. But we'll have an answer at some point here soon. Always appreciate
it. We know that by January 23rd, we are going to have an answer on this. It's a lot different than watching out the Alex Bregman sweepstakes.
True.
We have
right.
no idea where it's going to end, right? We know what the end date is. It could happen any time before that, but we know that it won't happen any later than the 23rd.
I need it now.
Mike. Yeah, I think we all do.
We do.
It's so boring as 2 weeks. So
Yep. We appreciate it, Mike. Thank you as always.
Yep. Take care.
Right. Mike Ferrin, MLB Network Radio. We'll react on the other side. The Wrap at 4 p.m. Aztec basketball tickets to give away. It's Jon and Jim.